You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I am one of the hosts of the show, and I'm joined today by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox.
I'm so excited to be here today and excited for our new guests. So I think let's get started and meet our latest guest on the podcast.
Yeah. So before I introduce today's guest, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Buses by the Beach. So they are powering today's podcast for us. Buses by the Beach is a group of VW bus lovers based in West Michigan. They camp, host events, and raise funds for Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors. Their first event of 2024 is actually coming up this weekend. It's their Buses Burr event, which if you have been listening for a while, you know Amber and I are too cold to go to that one.
Yes,
but their main event, Bus Benefit, is held over Memorial Day weekend every year in Michigan. So if you're local to the area, if you're a VW lover, or if you're up to go on a little trip over the holiday, you can learn more by visiting busesbythebeach.org. So without further,
sounds like something I want to attend, but
not the cold one, just the warm event.
No, and I told Amy last time we were on, I was like, this sounds like an event I want to attend because I love buses, VW buses specifically, but I don't have a bus. So, but I guess you're still invited even if you don't have a bus. So
yes, they're going to a new location this year, I'm pretty sure. So they'll have more camping space. So even if you don't have a bus, or are okay with camping out, I think you'll be able to attend. Yeah. So be sure to check that out.
Trekking my way up to cold Michigan from Florida.
Definitely. Well, without further ado, I do want to introduce today's guest. So today we have on, hold on, I practiced her name and I want to make sure I say her last name correctly because we talked about it before. Michelle Escamilla. I think I did that pretty close. She'll correct me when she comes on. But she joins us today to share about her life, including being a burn survivor, a spouse and friend, an advocate for self-love, and as someone who pushes through life's adversities and uncertainties. Through one of her own identities, including being a burn survivor, she describes living a life beyond just surviving. Michelle dedicates her life to serving the community in a variety of roles, and most recently has begun podcasting to share her story and experience with others. So thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle.
Of course. Thank you so much for that. I'm so excited to be here, and I am ready for today's conversation.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to the world of podcasting with us as well. It's a fun place to be, right? But Michelle, before we dive into some questions, I know I'm not super familiar, but also I think our listeners would be interested to learn a little bit more about yourself and your burn survivor journey, if you're open to sharing that with us today.
Of course. So I have been part of this community and a burn survivor for over 20 years. My family and I were in a car accident many years ago. I was in middle school when that happened. And thankfully, everybody survived. But of course, everyone came out of it with, not being the same. We all had suffered some type of injury. And at the time, it was my parents, my brother, and myself. And so as being younger kids and being, in the back of the car, my brother and I were impacted more deeply than my parents were. So fast forward a little bit of that time, we were in the hospital for almost 4 months where, I had scars head to toe. It was something like 60% third degree burns. So all over. And, I think in the moment, especially being so young, you have no idea what to expect. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. I mean, it's not like I did this by choice, right? So having been through that certainly opened my eyes. And I'm very grateful that throughout that time of recovery, because as you well know that there are different stages of recovery. There's the immediate trauma, but then there's, what's that aftercare like? What's it like to be a teenager with an injury? What's it like to be a young adult? What's it like to be a professional? And then in relationships and all of these different types of roles that we play. So there's certainly things, as I kind of says in my bio, learning resilience, learning how to live in uncertainty, finding ways to be comfortable when things are kind of uncomfortable. And so that's kind of what has led me to where I am today. And throughout this entire time, I'm so grateful that I feel like I have understood that I have this calling to give back to the community. And, also something I've realized is that I have met many people, whether with Phoenix Society or with other communities that are burn survivors and have physical external scars, and how challenging that can be. And also, I've met people who perhaps are either part of the burn community or just have other types of trauma, who maybe have internal scars and struggle just as much with, self-love, acceptance, confidence, being in relationships. And so I think that's something that I have found to relate to other people, is that we all struggle with different things. And I think that one of my greatest strengths is trying to sit with the uncomfortable, even if it feels weird and all that kind of stuff. But there's so much strength and power in sharing that and being open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, reiterating what you just said, I mean, everyone has struggles. We all have different challenges and adversities. For burn survivors, burn survivors with visible scars, we just have to wear them on the outside. We can't cover them up as easily as some other folks can. But thank you for sharing your journey with us and your story. I knew a little bit about your story before the podcast, but I didn't realize that your whole family was involved in that accident. So what was that like, I guess, even just growing up as a burn survivor, but then also your brother was a burn, like your whole family was a part of this, but I'm sure you each all had your different challenges, through the healing process.
No, of course. No, it's not, I don't want to say it's common for everyone to be impacted to this type of degree. And although it was really challenging, because we all at some point were hospitalized, and some of us had to have procedures and others just had different types of recovery, I think that there were so many layers to this. So my first thought in your question is, not only were we all impacted, but we also, are people who come from a different cultural background. So in Latino culture, generally, looks are huge. Types of bodies is something that people really idolize. And then, just all of these different layers that kind of played into our recovery. And so I think that one of the gifts that I've taken away from it, if looking back now, is that I'm able to sympathize and see from a different perspective. So not only did I see it from the survivor's perspective, I've seen it from the siblings' perspective. I've seen it, I hear my parents talk about how hard it was for them throughout our initial recovery, talking about, how do I divide my time between work and between having to go to the physical therapist or a potential upcoming surgery and all of that stuff, and how it impacted their relationship and also their identity as a parent, as an adult, where one of my parents was able to return to work and, kind of became the breadwinner. And the other one, my mom, she knew that in that moment, her role was to stop working at the time and then get to our recovery to make sure that we did do our stretches and did wear our pressure garments and all that kind of stuff. So I think it has been eye-opening to hear their perspectives. And also, I think there are times when it can be challenging because, my parents would say how there were times that they felt guilty, that parent guilt, that they felt like they couldn't do anything to help us besides just be there for us. And so as a child, that's hard to hear because you never want your parent to feel bad about something that's out of their control. But I think that going through something together has allowed us to have space to have these conversations. And I think that's one of the things that has really driven us, is to have that open space. And I also will say that, a big part of my family's identity and my identity is the way that we've been connected to the community. And in particular for us, it was our church community. So just having a place where we felt like we could share and be open and have that thing that anchored us throughout those difficult times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so, unique in a sense, because your parents had to be the caregiver, but then also take care of themselves, which is something we tell all caregivers and parents and spouses and partners and things like that. But, even more so because they have to care for themselves and their own injuries and going back to work, but then also taking care of your children and their physical recovery and their emotional recovery. And, I can't imagine, for your parents, what that was like, just having so much on your plate. I feel like for my parents, just me being the only person injured was already so much to take on. I can only imagine that being something that the whole family was really, really deeply involved in. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course. No, I think, to add on to what you're saying, one of the things that I look back at and I reflect on is, again, like I said, this open space that we had created. And I remember so when our injury happened, I was in the 5th grade. I was going into 6th grade. So again, middle school. And I remember that whenever my mom would share our story, at the time, she kind of was the one who, led that and sharing with other people. She would always say that some of the questions she would ask herself is like, will my daughter graduate? Like the common questions that she would have, which I look back at now and I'm like, of course I would. Like that's a given. But it was naturally a worry of hers. She would say, will she graduate? Will she, date? Will she be dating people? Will she get married? Will she have kids? Will she become a professional? Will she have a career? All of these questions that I think are very natural and are very valid, because there's so much uncertainty that you face when you go through a deep injury. But certainly can just say how grateful we are to be where we are now, recognizing that it hasn't always been an uphill, climb, that there's moments when you feel like you're kind of all over the place. But that's part of life, and it's brought us to where we are today. And, when people ask you, if you could go back, would you change things? My answer genuinely is no, I don't think so, because I am who I am today because of all the things that I've been through. And I've learned so much and I've gained so much. Yes, there are moments that we have to grieve of, as a preteen, understanding what is beauty, understanding what you used to look like versus what you look like now. My body, like I said, was impacted fully. So my face, all over my face, I have scars. There's amputations, like everything, you name it, head to toe, a little bit of everything. So there was a grieving process. But then now coming to understand that all of these experiences have made me to be beautiful as who I am now, and accepting that, and, lifting myself up and others to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Well, Michelle, it seems like we all get the memo today that it's Valentine or tomorrow's Valentine's Day. And so we're all in that pink variation. So in the spirit, I know I didn't even know it, but we're all matching today, and that was not on purpose to anyone listening. But in the spirit of love, in all things Valentine's Day, we'd love for you to share with us a little bit more about your journey to self-love. And that might look different for everyone. So if you don't mind, maybe walking us through, it sounds like from what you just said to me that your injury is at a really critical time in your life, right? Like you're in middle school or going to middle school. Like that's a really tough, I think about my middle school journey, not as a burn survivor. And then I think of what it probably was like for you in the beginning and kind of how you've evolved. So if you want to talk to us a little bit about that, I think that'd be helpful to kind of understand and learn more about.
No, of course. Thank you for that space and that opportunity to talk about that. I think that, man, oh man, this is something that we all, to some degree, have experienced and maybe struggle with. Like, think about the last time you went to, the mall or a store, and you saw something on the mannequin and you said, that looks great on them. but I don't know how that would look on me. And I share that silly example because I think that's a lot of times where that starts, is how we think and what we say about ourselves. And so, when we went through our injury, and again, like being so young, I was trying to find a way to fit in. And I feel like most people in middle school, you're trying to find out your identity. Like, who are you? And what do you stand for? What do you love? What do you not love? And asking yourself all of these questions that we do kind of in that teenage time. So I think that because I was so young, kind of on that curve line of finding my identity, I hadn't really fully formed who I was as a teen. I'm sure if my injury would have happened maybe later in my teenage years, it maybe would have been harder. But this to say that, confidence and self-love and all of these things, it's a muscle. It's a muscle that we have to practice. It's not like I wake up every morning and say, my barometer is at 100% and I love myself to the, umpteenth degree. It's not quite like that. But it's about, constantly encouraging yourself, constantly just saying positive things or affirmations to yourself. So for me, the journey is rooted in that. If people were to kind of ask, like, what's the formula? First of all, there's no like A plus B equals C formula. But I think one of the things that's really helped me is to start with my own language. So I can tell you times that as a teenager, I would go to the store and perhaps look at something like I was just sharing at the top of this example and say, it looks great on her, but not on me. And throughout my journey, whether it was my parents, whether it was my community, whether it was, like I said, for me, my faith, was this constant reminder externally of these affirmations. You know what? People might not understand, but that's okay. This is something that my parents would always say to me, and again, was affirmed through these other venues. People might not be okay with how you look or how you present yourself in this world, but that is okay. We are here for you. We know your journey. They probably are just curious and have no other way of expressing curiosity but than to gawk or stare or ask questions. But know that you are valuable. And these are constant. So again, externally, I'm hearing these things to the point where I'm like, let's just try to start having this language. So when I did see that mannequin of the mini skirt, because I have scars on my legs, or the crop top, or the, no sleeves, I would tell myself, why not? Why not try it? And at first, perhaps I felt uncomfortable in the change room, but then I would say, no, you are valuable and beautiful. So why not? Now, as an adult, I'm sure the two of you know, and people who are listening, that voice tends to get a bit more critical the older that we get. It's like, oh, I could never wear these crop tops that are out there because of whatever, for whatever reasons. But I think that, again, like I said, it's a muscle. This idea of self-love and confidence starts that way. It starts by repeating this until at some point you gain that power and say, yes, I am beautiful. Not everything is going to fit me, and that's okay. But I'm not going to limit myself. I'm not going to stop living. I'm not going to hide simply because in this moment, I feel uncomfortable. So again, coming back to just a theme in my life is being okay, being a little bit okay with being uncomfortable. And I think, for me, I'm sorry, I wanted to just say, I think for me, and to kind of go into dating, I think that was the stepping stone, was first being okay with myself to then be able to, meet other people.
I think that's important. I think it's also important, like you said, to start using that language early on. It's funny because my husband and I are already having this conversation, right, about my son. Like we just had a son, and we're like, I'm like, I want him to grow up confident in himself, right? And I think that starts with the language you use early on, right? Of like, and so it's really hard as a parent now to think like, oh my gosh, yes, I have to be uber conscious of the way I say things, because I want him to love himself for who he is, no matter what, right? And it's really hard when we have that negative self-talk to continue to kind of put that in our, or if our parents are saying things that are making us critical, like maybe not intentionally, right? But these are all things that you think about when we talk about self-love. Like, and I think for a burn survivor, it's even harder, right? Because you're surrounded by people that are talking negative about, right? Or saying things that maybe they don't mean, but to you, it can be harmful. So I would, I guess, encourage the parents out there, especially for those with burn survivors, I think like to continue to use, like you said, that body positive language on others, because sometimes it's subtle. And I think we don't always register like what we're saying or how we're saying it. But I do think that what we hear others say probably impacts that quite a bit. I'm sure you can relate, Michelle.
No, you hit on such a great point, Amber. I think not only is this about physical beauty, but I think about sometimes how we talk about ourselves. So part of my journey has led me to working with, families and parents and other individuals. And when you're talking about parenting in particular, I think about how many times we naturally do things without really speaking them out loud. And so as a child, you only are able to see what the parents do. We're not hearing their inner dialogue. And the example that I kind of want to share is, I'm thinking about a time when, especially as a child, you think that failure is a bad thing. I messed this up. I must be bad. This is the thinking that we often get. And so something that I would tell people and parents is, let's say we spill something in the kitchen or we drop something. And instead of saying like, oh, like that was so dumb of me, or I'm so clumsy or whatever, it's about externally saying these things to model this behavior. Oh, it fell. These things happen. We're going to tidy it up and it's okay because, it was an accident or whatever. And so even just our thinking is, our image, yes, of course. And also removing this language of, I am bad, I am not good, I'm not worthy, which again comes with just modeling that in there every day.
Yeah. Well, because they absorb everything, right? They absorb everything we do. And so naturally, if we're saying things negatively about ourselves, that's going to also impact the absorption of our children, right? And so I think you're right. Like if you see your parents doing those things, especially as a survivor, that can reflect right back on you and how you talk about yourself too. So I think that's a great point.
Well, and not just even parents too, as adults, just surrounding yourself with folks who do build your confidence and who, if your friend group isn't supportive of you, it may be time to reevaluate, who's boosting you up and building your confidence and building you up. I mean, so that's another thing to consider too. If you're struggling with, finding that confidence and self-love and you need support, your friends or family are there to help support you.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point too, because in the spirit of Valentine's Day, if the person you love is not supporting who you are, right, no matter what size, shape, what you look like, I think that's also time to reevaluate your life choices, right? I think that's, we've all been in maybe relationships that we're not too happy with. And I think reevaluating that, especially on Valentine's Day, right? I was like, if they're not supporting me and loving me for who I am, how can I, continue on in this relationship? So I think that's a great point, Rachel.
No, certainly. I think, there's tools that we can use to do this. So I think about how, if you, like to your point, Amber, if you feel like you're in this relationship and it's probably just not healthy for you, it could be hard to self-analyze that within yourself and say like, oh, this is an unhealthy relationship for me. So, there's this invitation to find people in your community that you feel like you could be safe and vulnerable with, who will give you an opinion that is not swayed. So if you feel like, you have a best friend who's there for you, but might talk badly, it's important for you to find someone who is in this middle ground, who can tell you truth, but with grace, with kindness, ultimately, looking out for the interest of just self-improvement and growth.
Well, and you brought up dating a little, and I know, again, in spirit of Valentine's Day and love, and I also know, because I follow you, Michelle, on Instagram, but that you got married not that too long ago, I think like maybe 2 years ago. So if you're comfortable with sharing, can you just talk us through a little bit more of like how building your own self-love was such a major step in finding a romantic partner? Because that's just a topic that comes up so often in our community. It's getting back out there after a burn injury, and not even in the dating aspect too, just in social situations as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. I feel like there's so much anxiety that comes with putting ourselves out there. There's so much that we can be fixated on when the reality is that it's likely that even if other people do not have injuries, physical injuries, they likely are struggling with similar anxieties. Will they like me? Will they not like me? Am I funny? Am I not funny enough? Like, there's so many things that just naturally we struggle with in our minds. And so I understand how hard it can be when we quote unquote add an extra layer to all of our worries. So, it's important to say that it's very valid. It's a valid fear or worry that we have of, will I be accepted? Will they like me? So, want to start by saying completely valid and understand that. And then, the next piece of that I really do think is working on yourself internally. So I want to share with you a little bit about my story with my husband. So we have been together going on now 11 years, dating and married. We've been married now for, I think, going on 4 years. So when we talk
I guess
about it,
my math was wrong. Sorry about that.
no, it's okay. But we had the same conversation recently. We looked at each other and we're like, have we been together that long?
My husband and I have that conversation quite often. Like, wow, this has been a really long time, and it seems like it's gone by super fast. So yes, I understand.
Totally. And so, before meeting him, I was on this journey of finding the way to just love myself. I think that was huge in my process, so that when when my husband came around and, we met and all those things, I had done a lot of work within myself to know that, I had value, that I was someone who was special, that I was someone who, brought all these talents and had all these quirks and qualities. And yes, she's a burn survivor. And also she has all these other really great qualities. So I think, during that process of self-discovery, I think that a huge part of that, again, was really cementing who I surrounded myself with. What was the language I used about myself? What was the language I used about others? In Latino culture and in a bunch of different cultures I'm aware of too, we tend to describe people by certain attributes. Maybe we have someone who is a friend who is more curvy. And so in our culture, we would say, Michelle, who looks like this, whoever that looks like that. And we tend to define ourselves with that language. And I'm constantly still working on that to say, I want to be defined not only as a survivor, but with all these other beautiful qualities. And so I will also work on my language as how I describe and see my world. So I think that for me, that was huge. It was really like putting these blocks in place so that when I met people, when I would go out, whether it was on dates or just meeting people to meet people, the conversation was, if I ever dreaded the moment of like, oh God, I need to tell them that, this is why I have scars and all these things, I would, before having that conversation, say to myself, okay, let's identify this. You feel a little anxious that they're going to know, that they're going to feel uncomfortable with you and your scars. That's okay. Like, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is they say, you know what, maybe not for me, but maybe also the other thing that could happen is that they would say, oh yeah, I saw that, but it's not a big deal. So let's just try. Let's just be okay with being a little uncomfortable. Have fun. Like, don't make it such a serious topic. And also that, just work on your other qualities too. Like, you have so much to give, girl. Like, why are you freaking out? But having that internal language with myself versus, oh, if they know, they will not want to talk to me. They're going to tell the whole town. They're going to make all these hate pages. Who knows? Who knows? All the what ifs that in reality are only that. They are the what ifs. So again, just it's not about, oh, she was so courageous and she just didn't care. It's not that. I can assure you, it was just the fact that I would say, okay, you know what, I'm going to take a chance and be true to who I am and hope that it works out. And if it doesn't, coming back to, like I said, what I've been told and affirming myself, that's okay too. It's okay.
So we talk a lot about that language, right? Of reframing how you're thinking. And I find it interesting when you talk about Latina culture of this is how, my culture frames things. How do you stop yourself, right? Or what do you say to yourself to stop or maybe correct yourself? Because I think reframing your thinking can be really hard and it can take some time. But what are some tools, I guess, that you use to like reframe that language, right? So instead of saying Michelle, the girl with brown hair, or however it is you say it, how do you stop that? And what are some tools you use to, I guess, help reframe some of that language?
Yeah. It's hard. It's challenging because there are systems in place that we use as a default. I mean, I'm sure it's not just Latino culture that experiences this. And I think particularly in older generations, it was more acceptable. I think about people now, whether millennials or Gen Zs or of other generations, that there's way more fluid in, their thinking, more open. And so I think tools that I use is really, first of all, just having a lot of grace, because not everyone thinks the way that I think. And it's looking for other things that I could describe someone that doesn't necessarily come with either a negative connotation or this like stigma. So, I can think about this even in, the burn community or even in the world of disabilities, like, oh, the person in the wheelchair, oh, the person, whatever. And it's like, they're so much more than that. It's about, learning who they are. What are their interests? Oh, you remember that I told you that they do rock climbing and how cool that is? It's even just how you present it. And coming back to kind of what we're talking about is like, how do you frame these things? Is, when dating, do we come at it with this like really heavy mentality of are they going to like me or are they not going to like me? It's more about, being more lighthearted and having fun with it and just leaning into that instead of it being so extreme and so grave.
I do want to touch too. We did have a great conversation with the girls at Dateability in a previous season. Rachel, I don't know if you remember
it might have been at the end of season 2. I'll make sure we have a link to it.
We'll link to it in this podcast. But I remember too, like, it can be really difficult, like you said, Michelle, to, especially with a disability, right, to not have to, like, I don't want to have to put on my profile, right, I'm in a wheelchair. Like, if you're not ready to commit to that, like, so those are things that I think the Dateability app did really well, right? Of like accepting, like, you're on here knowing that there are different challenges that may be faced, right? And so I really loved what the girls at Dateability had to share with us too. So if you haven't listened to that episode, there's a little call out to, there are apps and things out there too. If you're looking to meet someone, I think that just with that, not having to worry about, like Michelle, you were talking about, oh, do I have to bring that up on the first date? Or do I have to bring it up really even before the first date happens? So those are things I think that we probably all think about, especially as survivors, that, hey, is there something out there or tool that I can use to not have to have that anxiety before I go into those conversations?
No, totally. When thinking about anxiety and coming kind of back to the story of my husband and I, we had been dating for a few weeks. It was the beginning of our relationship. And I remember having the thought of like, he hasn't asked me anything yet. And I haven't said anything yet. And the anxiety would build. The anxiety would start to build of like, okay, like, when should I bring this up? How should I bring this up?
When is he going to say something finally, right? Because I also have those conversations of like, you noticed, right? Like, what are you going to ask me? Right? Because I have those thought with friends, never mind someone I'm dating. So
exactly that, those were worries. They were true worries that I had. What is he going to say? What if we take this relationship further and we decide to be intimate, and like, what is he going to say? And I start making this monster bigger and bigger. And so I remember, those first weeks, like I said, we were, hanging out, and it was just like bubbling inside of me. So I decided, you know what, Michelle, gain the courage and ask an uncomfortable question. And so I remember I asked him, and I said it exactly like this. I said, hey, why have you never asked me anything? And he kind of just looked at me very confused and said, like, about what? And I said, about me. And he continued in confusion, and he's like, I don't know what you mean. So then I was like, okay, I need to spell this out for him. So I was like, like, I'm a burn survivor and I have all these scars, and I'm sure like that's different. And his response was just, it was so beautiful. And it just surprised me a little bit, because he said, that's not the first thing that I noticed. Like, there's so many beautiful things about you that like I hadn't even put attention to it. And so I was confused by his response, but then I thought about the fact that because that's how I see myself. I see myself like that. Yes, I have these scars and all that stuff. And I also have other things that I think are beautiful. And so at first, after my initial confusion and like, what is happening, I sat with that and I said, why do you think that he responded in the way that he did? Perhaps it's because that's how you see yourself too. And so, as our relationship continued and it evolved and, we got married and all that kind of stuff. In terms of like intimacy, the same thing. It was about what's he going to think? What's going to happen? And then just coming to that place of like, you know what? Have fun, be okay with being a little uncomfortable, and know that the way that you see yourself is likely how he will interpret it too. Like, behavior is a language. This is something that I say all the time. Behavior is a language. And if we are already coming into something with this behavior where we're anxious and you can see it, it's clear, people will absorb that. And so let's name it, if truly we're uncomfortable, just to say like, hey, I'm feeling kind of like a little nervous, but you know what? Like, it's okay. It's okay. And having those conversations.
And I had my husband part of my life during my injury, right? So for me, it's really hard when he says today, like, I forget you have scars. I'm like, what do you mean you forget? Like, I see them every day. How do you forget? But I also understand to your degree, Michelle, of like, that's not all that person sees. So I think it's helpful to also remind yourself of that. And I sometimes forget about that too, of like, that's all I see all day, every day. But that doesn't mean that that's what that person sees every day. You know what I mean? Like, that person may see something different. And so I think you bring up a good point too of remembering, yes, it's how you see yourself, but it's also reminding yourself that not everyone just stares at your scars, right? Some people may be curious, but then, okay, we can move on. So I think that's also an important thing to remember, is they see you very differently maybe than you see yourself. And so that can also be a positive thing too, right? Like, the way I look may not be what everyone cares about, right? It's not what everyone cares about. They care about who I am. And so while there are some folks out there that have negative kind of thoughts, not everyone's like that.
Yeah. And that's a battle within itself, kind of how we started this conversation of that self-talk. Listen, I could tell you many times I've been to the store or just out on the street, and I will have someone look at me, and I have the choice to say, like, because I don't know what they're thinking. For all you know, they are curious and they have no other way of showing it. Or sometimes I tell myself, just to kind of like feel a bit better, I'm like, maybe they just love your jacket. Maybe they know someone who's been burned. And I know how many times I've looked at someone and said, oh my gosh, they can't see my scars right now. But if they only knew, I know what they've been through, right? And like, so there's times I think we think that it's always going to be negative, but maybe it's not, right? Like, what if you ask yourself, maybe there's something else, right? Like you said, maybe it's my jacket or something else out there. I love that example. I can think of one example that is about that just I still think about, even though it happened years ago. It was middle of August, boiling hot. I'm wearing my little biker shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm doing my groceries, running my errands. So I'm at the store and I'm doing my typical weekly groceries, and there was this lady who, from the moment I walked in, her eyes were so focused on me. And so what I try to do in practice is, okay, I see her, I smile, and then I go about my time and my day. So I head down to the first aisle. And lo and behold, I meet her in the first aisle. So we like, okay, it's the thought. I'm like, do I want to do this today? Do I want to have this conversation? Or do I just want to ignore it? Okay, you know what, Michelle? Just ignore it. Just smile and do your thing. She continues to look at me as we cross paths down the aisle. At this point, I'm like, okay, it's fine. We go down, without kidding you both, the next 2-3 aisles. So we keep running into each other. And you could tell that she just like her eyes like wanted to talk to me or see me. But by this point, I had lost my grace and I had lost my patience. And I was like, I don't know, like, do I want to start giving looks? No. I don't, the things that you start thinking, because my self-talk was saying like, okay, she's staring at you. Like, she's not leaving you alone. So I'm already kind of in a mood, but I'm trying to, again, work with my self-talk. And I said, I'm going to go to this cashier register because there's no one here. And guess who goes behind me? It's this lady. So by this point, I'm like, you know what? Let's just have a conversation. Let's give her the very short spiel and I will go at peace about it. So I turned and I looked at her and I said, hi, how are you? Oh, good. And then she looked at me and with tears in her eyes, she said to me, I just could not stop watching you because I have a daughter who was injured and she is so afraid of going outside in this weather in a t-shirt and shorts, and how I wish that she could see you to see that there's hope, that it's okay. Like, you can still live your life. And so she said that to me. And I'm telling you, I was like, wow, oh, wow. I had created this whole narrative that this woman was trying to track me down. But the truth was, she was so inspired just by having a conversation with me. And so now that I look back at that, I think to myself, the power of our words and of our thoughts, because I had already created this story, but the truth was something else. So, it was amazing to me.
Yeah, I can relate to that story so much because the same things have happened. Like you think people are staring and your mind kind of automatically goes to like this negative side when, a lot of people may have never even seen a burn survivor before. So maybe they're staring because they're curious and not because of they are wondering what's wrong with you or do they have a disease. That's kind of where my mind always goes. I'm like, well, I wonder what people actually think my scars are. Like, where did they think they came from? Right. And so, that just, if you feel comfortable and want to approach someone, I encourage folks to do that because look, you inspired someone and she probably went home and told her daughter all about this. And it's probably like, you have to come to the store with me now every single time I'm going to go because we need to run back into Michelle.
No, so true. And the thing that I'm reminded of is, to your point, Rachel, is someone may have never seen a burn survivor before. And the thing that I'm always reminded of is, and this might be the only time they see a burn survivor. So you have an opportunity, not necessarily, because I think that a lot of times people feel a sense of responsibility, like, oh, I need to, whatever. It's not about that. It's not about that. You don't even have to say anything most times, but it's about, just taking that deep breath and having that understanding that like people are often curious. Sadly, we don't have other ways of expressing it for certain people. But to just understand that even a smile goes a long way.
Definitely. And who knows, like if let's say you would have lashed out on her in aisle 3 and she could have went home crying and been like, wow, like this is the experience that I have. And granted, she did have a daughter with an injury, but you could give someone the negative. This is another topic, but we talk about the media representations of survivors all the time and how villains are normally the characters that have burn scars. And there's really never heroes that represent our community. So that's a whole nother topic. We don't have to go down it, but just a good example of, we can be the positive representation in our own communities. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, I know we are coming up on time and you've been providing so many, great stories and tips for our communities, but I did want to switch gears just a little because I do know you host 2 podcasts, I believe, But now, I said you were married for 2 years and it's been 4. So maybe you have 4 podcasts. I don't know.
The math is mathing. The math is mathing.
I'm not good at math. I'm good at girl math, and that's about it. But
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. I wanted you to share a little bit more about your 2 podcasts. I know the one is survivor focused, so I'm sure our community would love to take a listen as well.
Of course. No, thank you for offering that space to talk a little bit about them. So yes, I have 2 podcasts that are very different in and of themselves. So I do have this first one called More Than a Survivor, where myself and my co-host, John Westhaver, we are 2 people that really just kind of sat down one day and started having this conversation of, we want to live our lives beyond just that, just this idea of surviving. And although a lot of our guests so far have been burn survivors, we want to have conversations with people who have been through many types of experiences to discuss life's ups and downs and everything in between. So it's a super exciting project that we have going on where we just talk about, what it's like when we've had an injury, and then what was it like when we've decided to start thriving in our different roles. So that's the first podcast. And then the other one that I have is called the Make Believes podcast, which is a totally different end of the spectrum, which kind of is what the title says. It's about everything and nothing at the same time. And I co-host that with my lovely chosen sister, Leslie Valladares, where we are 2 girls who talk about fun things. We talk about, people's experiences and what kind of went wrong or what was really great. Laugh at silly different things and have fun topics like fashion, skincare, wellness. And if you want to just hang out with 2 really cool people for, like 20, 25 minutes, an invitation to check it out.
I'm definitely going to have to listen because that sounds right up my alley.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Michelle, before we close out here, I do want to ask you a little bit more about how you're involved in your community. I know you are a SOAR volunteer. But how can we keep up with you and a little bit more about you and your community?
Of course. So for anyone who's curious and just wants to follow my journey, my Instagram is Michelle Escamilla, which is part of my 2 last names, Escamilla and Valladares. We can share that information later. But the ways that I'm active in my community, I recently moved here to California. And I am at a place now that we've kind of settled a little bit and are ready to take part in different avenues. So whether it is, with our local community, I'm also becoming involved more and more with the burn community here in California. I love having these types of conversations. I look forward to, speaking and sharing either with different groups, different generations, because like I've said, I feel like throughout the common thread throughout this whole conversation is that this topic of self-care and confidence is for everyone. This is something, it's not like you just check a box, I'm done. No, this is something that constantly will be evolving and is a muscle that we have to practice. So, there's so much coming in for 2024 and you'll all need to stay tuned to see what goes on.
It's amazing. Awesome. Well, Amber, do you want to quickly introduce our last 2 questions? We did get 2 new questions for season 4, so I'm excited to ask you these.
Yeah. So our first question for you, what is something that you want caregivers and loved ones of survivors to know? I know we've talked a lot about self-love today, but I think it's also important to know, with the perspective of you were kind of both, right? You're a survivor, but you also are the loved one of a survivor as well. So can you share with us maybe something, a quick tip or something that you want others that have supported burn survivors to know?
Of course. I would say that going through this journey alone is so hard. And it's not that the burden is lifted, but it's a lot lighter when we go through life in community. So, I think the one thing I hope that people take away is to be in community. And if you feel like you don't have that, this is a space for that. This is a space to, have these conversations. And I invite you to think about who is, 1 or 2 people that I could share these experiences with. And my I don't want to call it tip, but the thing that I want to share with people is you don't have to do this alone. And it's so much harder to do that, when we don't have support. So be in community, share your heart with others, and know that when we walk together, the burden is a lot lighter.
Speaking of community, Rachel, I think it's important that we acknowledge, the community options available at Phoenix Society. So we have some support groups, we have some support chats. And Rachel, there's a Spanish-speaking community coming very soon as well, correct?
Yes. So right now we do have a Facebook group. So we have a Facebook page, but we also have a group, for survivors and caregivers. It's, if you're into Reddit, it's very similar to that, or other groups that you may be a part of, asking questions, getting connected with one another. So I'm really excited because Lily on our Phoenix Society team, she is fluent in Spanish and will be helping out with that Spanish speaking group. So that's coming very, very soon, if not already. So be sure to check that out or stay connected with us if you're interested in that, and really hope we can grow that community together. So it's also a great place, if you have questions about getting back out there or dating or want advice from other survivors and caregivers, it's a great place just to ask away. And it's a safe space to feel vulnerable in too. So we'll make sure we have that linked below as well. So but without further ado, our final question, it is our Phoenix partner question, which today is sponsored by Buses by the Beach, a group of VW van lovers who raise money for Phoenix Society, is: what is one thing that always brings a smile to your face, no matter how tough your day has been?
Oh, it would have to, oh my gosh, I love that question. It would have to be my dog. I think that,
right?
I know. I mean, puppies was the first thing that came to my mind, but in my day-to-day, it's having, someone who's wagging their tail as I come in the door, has been just such a joy, has brought us such joy. But the other thing that I would say also is music. I think that there's such power in music. I can tell you during the pandemic, man, oh man, did I have a lot of self-dance parties that can just bring up your mood, no matter where you are. Music has the power to, transform us or take us to different eras and seasons. So there's certainly some magic when it comes to music.
I love both of those. And I was also thinking my dog. I mean, when in doubt, get a dog or a cat, people. They'll change your lives.
That's right. Well, Michelle, it has been truly a pleasure to get to know you on today's podcast. And we'll be sure to, get those show notes in there to how folks can stay connected with you as well. So thanks again, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.